think, are we hoping for Professor Lashi to join us as well?
I haven't heard from her. I think it might be a bit late in Singapore time, so I think we might be missing her,
Fair.
unfortunately.
Oh, right, she's in Singapore. Of course
Is there anyone else we're missing? Ah, Cecilia.
Yeah, I'm still awake.
Still awake. Amazing. Would you like to join this discussion?
My camera is not working apparently. Oh, okay. Yeah, it is.
Very impressed. All right. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So I think some people here don't need any introductions. I already introduced Professor Abed and Professor Ida, and Lashi probably don't need introductions because they're running the conference. So Professor Brock kindly is joining us. He's a professor at the Technische Universität in Berlin, working on algorithmic foundations to make agents do intelligent tasks, anything from structural molecular biology to protein folding, all these things. And then at the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, Professor Sabelhaus had to drop off, but we had Professor John Riefel join us in his place. So John Riefel is an associate professor at the computer science department at Union College. He's interested in sort of genetic evolutionary algorithms, evolutionary robotics, soft robots, and security robots, as we all saw in the chat earlier. So thank you so much for joining, everyone. Welcome back. So I kind of want to pick up right where we left off before Professor Ellen Roche gave her excellent keynote or plenary, which is on what is the role of control in AI and embodied intelligence. So Professor Sabelhaus brought this up. I thought it was a great point to start the discussion on, right? So if we're relying on embodied intelligence, we're getting a lot of things for free, and we're getting a lot of ability and diversity in the types of robot motion that we can do. But do we still need then accurate control, or do we leave some of the AI on the controller? And so we got a couple of inputs, but I would love inputs from more folks on this panel. Anyone want to start?
Well, I'll just start. In about, I think, 50 minutes or an hour, I will be giving a talk on exactly answering that question. But I can give a brief preview. And I thought the talk by Andrew Sabelhaus was very interesting. He cited, I think, Cosimo della I don't actually know the last name. Cosimo della
Santina.
Santina, thank you. I had an M in there. Basically saying, well, if we control the position of either the object or any point on the robot, then we give up the benefit of control, of embodiment, right? I mean, so the whole philosophy that we use to approach control of soft robots is, I think, still very much shaped by our old view of looking at hard robots. We want to have precise models of soft robots. We want to be able to control their position exactly. I mean, also today, we were seeing plots where, there's the reference signal, and we really want to track that very precisely. And I'm sure that there are applications where that is exactly the right thing to do. But if we really want to take advantage of what the embodiment has to offer, then I think we need to come up with a control that gives some leeway to the body to actually do its thing, rather than to put the body into super tight constraints. And I think this is a very big departure from the way that we have been thinking about control. And I think that there are some very, very simple answers that in the presentation I will talk about in the context of in-hand manipulation. I don't know. I mean, I could give the talk now, but that's, I guess, not the point of the
well, how simple are your answers?
Super simple. No, the answers are super simple. Basically, you don't need anything. I mean, you need to know what the Jacobian is, and that's basically it. With a single kind of demonstration and iterative exploration of the nearby space, if you define the space the right way, you can come up with very complex skill. Well, we haven't really, very complex is too strong, but with sophisticated and robust and general skills.
I could not agree more with Oliver. I touched this point a little bit in my presentation as well. It's one of the trade-off that I mentioned, because as I said, I mean, we wanted to build soft robots for using embodied intelligence and not controlling everything. And then as soon as we have an arm with roboticists, we want to control it precisely. So, but I think that the two things are not completely exclusive. So in the end, if we think back of the typical scheme for sensory motor coordination in a robot, and we said, okay, embodied intelligence is this very short closed loop using the mechanical feedback from the environment. It doesn't mean that we don't want the rest of the scheme. So we also want the other levels of control. So the difficult thing is putting everything together. So we want to control something, but we also want our robots to have embodied intelligence and have some very low level mechanical closed loops. So this is my answer to some extent.
I appreciate that. I think perhaps can we hear from the last two speakers, and then I also have some. So I'm also curious to answer this question, or maybe bring up more discord. I'm not sure.
I would say I don't think I have anything to contribute to this question.
I mean, I would, to the extent that I understood the question, I think it might be a false dichotomy between embodiment and control, right? It's all part of the same thing. It's and sort of I've always understood the vision of embodiment as doing as much as we can to outsource aspects of control into the morphology and the material of the robot itself, so that we can then devote our engineering time and energy, or our computer scientist control theory energy, to actually getting the robot to do what we want, and not have to worry so much about the low level sort of the low level stuff that ideally is being handled by the morphology itself.
It's actually interesting to see the different perspectives or definitions of control. Like, everyone talks about control soft robots here, but it looks like there are different levels of control. On one hand, we want to control the shape of soft structures, or soft robotic arm, or soft fingers, and so on. But on the other hand, if you look at the primary talk of Ellen, she also wants to think about how to control the blood flow inside the soft heart and all that kind of things. And that's the probably different level of control that we're dealing with. And generally speaking, I think one of the interesting challenge is that how we, well, first of all, whether we employ the model-based approach or not. To get lots of short talks we had this afternoon, the second session was largely model-based, physics informed, or that's Teixeira's term, approach. But then there are lots of things we cannot actually model in the soft regime, and as soon as we cannot model, and then that's going to be a really difficult thing. And also the sensing comes into the picture as well, because if we cannot measure it, we just need to estimate it, or we just give up measuring it and predicting it, or something like that. And that's another big challenge in soft robotic system, because we don't have so many different kind of soft sensors or accurate soft sensors, or even if we have soft sensors, we cannot really measure the infinity degrees of freedom, and so on. So that's kind of, you know, a lot of different kind of problems and different levels of discussions entangled with each other. And that's my view of a control discussion of the soft robots. And I don't know whether that makes sense.
No, that was great. I think, and I think you touched on my concern as well. So what I'm hearing is that there are different levels of control, and possibly at the lowest level of control, it makes a lot of sense to outsource the intelligent response of our systems to embodiment. But at the higher levels, sometimes we want sophisticated control where we can provide guarantees that the system actually performs the way it's supposed to within some level. But I also agree from Professor Ida that when we add, a lot of our discussion is about biomimetics, but in biomimetics, natural organisms have a slew of sensors, and there's very tight couplings between the mechanisms and the sensory action feedback that allow organisms to have these low-level reflexes. And right now we talk about mechanical intelligence, but really it's electromechanical intelligence. We just don't have the sensory part, at least in soft robotics, to quite match up with biological organisms just yet. But maybe one day we'll get there. So just to throw one wrench in the discussion, because I like to do that as a moderator. I agree. I think embodied intelligence is fantastic. The fact we can outsource things is fantastic. But at the same time, we have a lot of tools at our disposal and more sort of traditional controls, right? We're getting better at it. And computation is getting immensely cheaper and immensely smaller, cheaper both in cost and in power and in volume, right? So what does that say for the future? I mean, should we be better about incorporating computation and thereby getting access to some of the more traditional design tools? Or do we need to take this direction where, because we can do simpler, we must do simpler? I'm not sure simple on its own is a goal.
So I'm not sure I actually understand the question, because I mean we're talking about trade-off, right? And I think John put it very nicely. We can outsource control and partially perception to the morphology. So that means that what we classically considered as stuff that we control now is taken over by something else. That means that control has to give up something, right? I mean, there is some aspect of control that we now cannot do anymore because we gave it to the morphology. And so I think that this is a sliding control, right? It's a sliding trade-off, right? We can decide how much control we want to give up or how much control we want to maintain. But then if we have soft robots that are flexible and have very large number of degrees of freedom, it seems like the wrong robot if you want to have super high precise control, right? Then why not use a hard robot? So I would not see this as a dichotomy. I would see this as a continuous trade-off. And depending on the application, I mean, Fumi said this, right? If we want to control the blood flow, we have a totally different problem than if we want to control the end effector of a robot against a wall or something, right? These are totally different tasks, and they presumably require, for different aspects of that task, a different point on that scale between full control in traditional computation and giving something up to the morphology.
This, this is an interesting topic related to, coming back to using traditional notions of control. So just this week in my linear systems class, we were talking about this notion of the straight term controllability for linear systems, right? And we always talk about this notion of a term that I think is a little bit strangely named, but the idea of stabilizability, where you have certain parts of your system's dynamics that are uncontrollable, but they already are stable. And then you have a choice as an engineer of what to do with that information. Do you want to, one path is you say, I want to add more actuation so that my uncontrollable things become controllable. Or you come to peace with the idea that you have uncontrollable dynamics and you're just accepting of that because they don't cause you any problems. And
they help you.
Yeah, maybe they help you.
Yeah.
At a minimum, they don't hurt you. And so if you come at a design path that says, I want to control everything from the beginning, and then I know that if I have control over everything and I've modeled everything, then I therefore will be able to do anything I want after the fact. That's one design path. It'll lead to complicated solutions. Or you come to terms with, I don't need control over everything. And this idea of, are you controlling are you interested in controlling an artificial muscle, or are you really interested in controlling some sort of blood flow somewhere? And that's your actual output of interest. Especially, I think, for many of us, we start going down design paths in which our first goal is to know how to do everything, and then I will be able to solve every problem after the fact. And you just lead to overly complicated solutions. That's certainly what we've found in our work on these small medical robots.
So the chat is taking on a life of its own, and people are starting to, turn on their videos, which is a great sign of a good discussion. So I'm excited about that. Professor Riefel, we'll get back to you. So I just want to, so I think there's control, like can we accurately pinpoint where a robot's going to go and pose control and so on. And then there's intelligence, right? An intelligent response. And so I think we all agree with respect to control, if we can outsource control and that control is still accurate, great, we're done. On the intelligence side, things are a little more tricky, right? How do we produce intelligent responses, both at the low-level behavior of the robot and at a higher level and according to some task-oriented behavior? So there was an interesting comment in the slew of comments online, which is, okay, what if we start doing these biohybrid designs and where nature already has some incentive of its own and it, produces some intelligent response in terms of what it wants to do. And now we're overlaying this architecture of engineering on top of it. How does intelligence and control come into play now? How much, where does that distinction go then? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. I don't know if does this sort of go along the lines of what you're interested in answering? Maybe. So I'll try to weigh in, and then you tell me how close to the mark I was. I think it boils down to how much control you want control over. I'm thinking that it's not just outsourcing, but it's more like attention focusing. Imagine this a purely hypothetical that somehow the morphology of a soft robot skin acts as a bandpass filter for some type of data, some sensing data, so that we only receive signals that we care about, rather than having to computationally filter out those signals. I think that's kind of the hope. And I think was it from Cecilia's paper? There was an equation of embodiment that we have now, which makes me really hopeful, because it's something that I think I've been wanting to see for a long time. But I think I didn't answer your new question at all, so I apologize.
Well, the question is very general. It's sort of framework where you can write down the terms and differently depending on the kind of modeling approach you can use. But the message there is that, sometimes we are a bit even too much pessimistic about modeling soft robots, modeling embodied intelligence. So we think it's just a difficult problem, but there are other communities that actually face even more complex systems, and they have techniques for modeling them. So in a sense, it's probably more about understanding what we want to model, and adding the models of external interaction. I think it's an important step in our field. Complex, of course, but again, there are other communities, other disciplines where it is done. So my fear is that sometimes there are techniques available and we just are not familiar with them. We are not used to adopt the same approaches. So that's more or less the idea of the general equation. So you can actually write down the terms with the mathematics that you want, the model that you want, the approach that you prefer, but the overall picture is to keep together and to couple the internal and external interactions with the physics of the soft body.
Maybe to bring this out just briefly from just soft robots, because you're touching a lot of different kinds of robots in this conference. An example of a biohybrid system is something we've been having ongoing in our lab, where we've used colonies of honeybees, which are very adept at pollinating their environment. And we're putting sensors on the back of those honeybees and letting them inform us of where bust and blooms happen around that environment, and then which flowers get pollinated, which in turn informs yield later in the season. And what we're doing there is not actually controlling the honeybees, right? The honeybees do what the honeybees want to do, and they're very good at doing it. They're very robust and efficient at doing it. So we're not touching that part of the system. But we are providing sensors and maybe just a little bit of control at the colony level for sort of giving sort of engineering level, guarantees and resolution in the sensory feedback that we need in order to extract it out of the system. So there we sort of left the intelligence of the intelligence of the organism that's already in place, and then we're just adding like a small level of control on top of it, but really only sort of worrying about the particular directions that we care about. That makes sense. Oliver, I saw you were eager to give your input.
Yeah, but I cannot really talk about bees.
No, that's fair.
Okay.
I'm just saying, that was sort of the biohybrid version of it, right? Where like there's intelligence already embedded into the bio, and the hybrid is a separate level of control.
Yeah, I think your example is one of hierarchical control, right? And maybe not immediately related to the embodiment question. And I want to come back to, I want to quote John again, who said we have to decide how much control we want about control. And I think, the whole reason I believe, and it would be interesting to hear if you agree with this, we have soft robotics is because hard robotics didn't work on a whole set of very important problems in robotics. We didn't manage to come up with the control, with the models, with the mechanisms to do some of the tasks. So in some sense, we don't have that option. I would say we're stuck with realizing that we won't have, during the execution of a motion, a precise exact state estimate, no matter how many mocap systems you buy, no matter how much you control the environment. There's going to be enough uncertainty to screw up contact dynamics. And so basically that means there's a part that cannot be controlled. So we don't have to give it up because it never was there. We've just found another solution for it. And but we can control that morphological computation by changing the shape of the robot, by adding sensing, by closing the loop around things. So we have control within the component within which we gave up control. I don't know if this makes sense or it's just super convoluted, but I really think that we don't have a choice. There's no choice because it just doesn't work with hard robotics. So we're stuck with this. There is some part of the world that we won't get into the inside of our robot.
This is great, and I'm seeing people nod. Oh, go ahead, Professor Eadie.
If everybody nods, all right.
No, I think I'm probably talking about the flip side of what Oliver and John is saying, and probably one of another point I want to bring up here is a notion of self-organization or self-stability, or whatever you call this, the funnel metaphor in the conventional control engineering approaches, and we need to rely on the self-stability, self-organization. Because we don't have a control authority over different elements, different dimensions, or different timescales. And this is something what Cecilia was talking about in her presentation about how to rely on self-stability, how to give up control, but rely on self-stability. And also this is probably the concept of self-organization bridges the gap between what the controls of robotics and what the person talking about, distributed system or biohybrid system. Some of them we don't have access, we don't have a control authority, a part of your body, and then how we cooperate and how we rely on self-organization in different regime of control. And one of the interesting thing about soft robotics is that we have a very different time scales of dynamics. Right? If you write the equations, differential equation, dynamic equations, we usually don't think too much about time scales. We stick in one time scale or narrow time scale. But then as soon as you go into the material world, we have a very highly damped system. We have a very high frequency system, and all this different variation of time scales are put into one embodiment. And that's another thing we can also combine in the context of self-organization, because then one control authority cannot reach out to the other timescale problem, and in that case, we can probably solve this kind of problem through the self-organization, self-stability principle. And that's I just wanted to bring in. The self-organization is sometimes people don't like this notions, but I think this is very more and more important when we talk about the embodied intelligence and the soft robotics in particular.
Go ahead.
So this is brief, but I'm sorry I missed the morning session, but just judging from all the talks I've seen, I think we almost have kind of an answer here to something, which is, I've been dealing with issues of embodiment, morphological computation for Lord knows how long. But looking at the fact that almost every single robot in the afternoon session was a soft robot, maybe we found the killer app. Maybe finally we can justify what we've been talking about with embodiment and morphological computation for so long, because really the problems we need to solve are so brought into focus by the challenges of soft robotics.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think we could go on this topic for a long time, but we already spent half our discussion on it, so I want to move us on in a different direction. So I also had to miss the morning sessions. I'm sorry, I was happily asleep in my bed. But Professor Lashy, I understood from Professor Hughes' recap of the morning sessions that you brought up the very interesting point that we still need to make an impact on society, right? We need to bring our robots out of the lab and actually show people that they're worthwhile and they're working. And we're not quite there yet, right? We're seeing a few cool examples, but it's not sort of the common trend yet. And I think this is sort of an identity crisis that's typical of any evolving field in robotics, right? But maybe especially so in soft robots, right? We promised a lot, and here we are, and we still have a lot of robots in our labs. And they all have fantastic applications on paper, but maybe they're not quite there yet. So I'd love to hear your insights. Throughout the afternoon, even we've seen sort of people who specifically apply their robots directly in the application scenario in the outside world where they're going to go, and we have people who work in the lab. And I wonder, where do we break that barrier? Where do people fit? What are your recommendations for people who are about to take on soft robotics if they do want to make real world impacts? How do they go about that? Maybe we could start with Professor Lashy.
Yeah, actually, I was citing the paper that I think all our the members of our community have read in Science Robotics by Mike and Oaks, and the paper was pointing out that yes, soft robotics is growing, but it's growing fast, so there is a risk that it will decay. And if if the community doesn't start looking beyond the community itself, so we shouldn't do research and publish work that are just for soft robotics' sake, but we have to look beyond that and produce a real impact. So where soft robotics can give this impact, societal good, that's a very difficult question. I'm not sure we can anticipate it too much. Usually it's just something that happens at some point when the technology is mature. I think that for real applications of soft robots for societal good, it's very much related to the previous discussion. So we have to get rid of the idea that we want to control the robots precisely and we want to control its behavior precisely, because this is the way we are used to see robots. And when we look at soft robots, we say, okay, we cannot really apply them because we are not able to control them precisely the same way we do with industrial robots. So we really have to do a step forward to develop robots that are robust, because I think that if we put embodied intelligence in them, they are even more robust than precisely controlled robots. At that point, they can be applied in many fields, but maybe we're not yet there. I don't know. That's just my feeling.
If I can add a bit more on application size, I think this today's session illustrates really nicely where is going to be the next big application area of soft robotics and embodied intelligence, which is we focus too much on robotics and control of robots, but actually what is more important is the humans, right? The humans, right, sitting next to robots, or Jake talking about the medical robots going inside our body, or artificial hearts of Ellen is coming to our replacing our body, and then we have a biohybrid technologies coming together. And no matter what we do with all these technologies, in the end, it comes to our human body, human embodiment, and human society. So I think that's going to be really interesting and important direction of research, how these technologies come together with human body and human society, and extracting the information from a physical embodied human body and society, as well as we also intervene the actions by using soft robot, right? So I think a human elements is probably one of the really important dimensions we should put in if we think about the societal impact of this kind of research and technologies.
Okay, so it sounds like the plea is to direct our army of students listening in out there, researchers listening in out there towards the HRI community. Does anyone have any other comments?
Well, I actually don't really think of myself as coming from the soft robotics community, which maybe isn't any surprise. I've been living in this community of people who've been trying to apply magnetic techniques to robotics since pretty much its beginning. And that community has a similar problem. And I would say one thing that people should be aware of is if your eventual goal is to have devices in the human body, which is typically a major motivating factor for a lot of people doing magnetics and robotics, you need to be thinking about how, first of all, techniques that are fundamentally 3D in nature. And so if you're doing benchtop experiments that live under a microscope that are sort of fundamentally on some sort of horizontal planar surface, and then you're trivializing the step to move to 3D, that's I think a pretty big problem, and that's why a lot of results sort of stay forever in the lab. So you should be thinking in terms of a 3D world from the very beginning. And then another thing is you have to think about scalability. So we know how magnetic fields scale with distance from sources and with the size of the source. And so you've got to be realistic about how you're going to take that few centimeters on your benchtop experiment and project that into maybe 10 centimeters in a human body, and be realistic about the scalings. And if you're not realistic about them from the beginning, then your methodology will forever live in your lab's benchtop. Another thing I've become a really big believer in this idea of dimensional analysis. I don't know, a lot of people don't really know about it. It's very well understood in the fluid mechanics community, but really it's a general physics principle that we should be thinking about all our experimental work in terms of dimensional analysis, something called like Buckingham pi theorem. If you're not familiar with it, educate yourself about this. Every result you make in an experimental setup, you can generalize that result to all other experiments that you never ran at other scales. And if you start thinking that way, you can be really honest with yourself about how things will eventually scale to the actual application scale.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just a question. Could it be that maybe robotics as a whole, but in particular soft robotics is just too young and too early stage and too explorative to really be seriously targeting real world applications?
I'm glad you asked the question. So that's where I was stemming from. So are we asking people to, because I do think if you want to breach the real world, and this is sort of what I think Professor Abbott was also getting at, is like you have to actually start with the real world application. You can't, play with something in the lab and then apply the application afterwards, right? You have to actually figure out what the real bounds are and how things are really going to work. And are we there yet with soft robots? I don't know. Are we there yet with embodied intelligence? Do we understand it well enough? I agree that with Professor Lashy's recent introduction of the equation, at least we can start, putting sort of a cohesive way of thinking about it. But I don't know if we're there yet.
And is that the equation from this paper? Let me what equation is this? Just maybe you can paste the link.
Yes,
Is this
it's
a
a
big
paper,
with many authors?
and it's in Nature Reviews Physics last year. But it's just a general framework, if you want, general mathematical framework.
Does somebody have the link? What do you say? Nature what physics? Nature what?
I'm sure we can find the link for you.
Nature Reviews Physics, but now
Or write down the formula or something, right? I mean, if there's this equation, let's talk about it, or at least know what we're talking about.
Whether or not this ends up being the fundamental equation for all of soft robots, right? I think the point is the more structure and the more benchmarking we start having in our field, right? The better we can make more cohesive thoughts and more cohesive drive and exploration. There's a picture coming up.
Yeah, thank you for the picture.
There you go. So also elaborating on Erlen Nolan's points, right? So there's been a bunch of points here. I think some of these are about sustainability. The materials that we use in soft robots also matter. And again, it depends on the particular application you're interested in applying your science to, right? But all of these things come into play. All right. So again, I don't think this discussion has to be on soft robots only. It just happened to be that we put together a panel that was very enthusiastic about soft robots. And Professor Abbott, for the record, I much consider your robots partially soft because you are guiding, part of your robot is really the system that it's being guided through, right? Which are all these intestines, and there's some very nonlinear fun system dynamics going on there.
Well, and also whenever you're using magnetic actuation, you fundamentally have compliance in that link between your actuator and your system you're actuating. And so you're right that a lot of the principles should still apply.
Yeah, and Professor Ida brought this up earlier too, right? With self-organization, as soon as you have repulsion and attraction between many agents, you end up with an overall system that has some flexibility in it. So I think we can be lenient in the way we describe soft robots and soft systems altogether. Okay, excellent. So one thing that I think is worthwhile sort of, ending the day on is your advice to researchers that are just starting up in the field out there and how to go about things, right? So one thing is, we've sort of touched on this already, like if you really want to make real impacts of tomorrow, which we see is driving a lot of our students these days, right? Like I don't want to just do robots for robots. I want to actually, change the world tomorrow. What should you think about? How should you approach this? Two, if you want to make big impacts in soft robots or embodied intelligent systems, right, where do you focus? And three, I think one of the most important things that students should maybe think about is it's a heavily interdisciplinary field, as we've seen. Okay, so how do you figure out who your collaborators is? How do you pick them from different disciplines? How do you figure out a common nomenclature where you can start actually discussing research innovations from? So I'd love to hear your advice for all the people listening out there. Go ahead, Oliver.
Let's just respond to one of the things, which is impact. Then we can go turn, but that's one I really kind of respond strongly to, because of course wanting to have impact is fantastic, right? I mean, our world needs impact more than any time in history before. But I think if you want to have impact, you have to realize that this is not something that's going to happen in 2 weeks. Having impact means that you're going to have to work at this consistently for a long time. I mean, years, maybe decades, right? And the expectation is, oh, with my first paper, I want to have impact. I see this again and again. So I really think science requires patience. Impact requires even more patience. So I think really don't expect immediate gratification. You got to have a long-term goal. You got to be self-driven. You got to derive pleasure out of the path. If you're just hoping within 3 months you're going to change the world, you're just going to get frustrated. I don't know. Do people share that view?
No, that was perfectly phrased, and I think the experience from Europe to America is about the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it gives me the opportunity for another recommendation, recommendation, because since the impact is not yet there, the applications are not yet there. So we, for the moment, we don't have this huge soft robot market yet. So we have an immense opportunity to steer it in the direction of sustainability, but it shouldn't be just a word. All the progress that we had recently with the smartphones, with computers, and we are producing a huge e-waste in the world, and it goes especially in third world countries. So we really have the opportunity with soft robotics to steer this and to change this, and it's now because maybe it's a bit late, but not too late. And since we are completely rethinking the materials, it's really a great opportunity. So this is also my recommendation to the young researchers, to the students, to go in that direction. I mentioned the computational efficiency today. We are using our digital devices in a way as if the data are free and the processing is free, but it's not, and it has a cost on the planet. It has a cost on pollution, and all the devices that we produce and we change and we throw away so early. And all the energy that they consume, it's completely wrong. I mean, in terms of an approach. And I think that with soft robotics, we really have a huge opportunity to change that and to produce devices that are efficient, energetically, and degradable, and so on. So this is my recommendation to future scientists.
Because I mentor exclusively at the undergraduate level, my advice is really easy, which is to tell my students interested in grad school to go work in your labs. So keep an eye out for their applications. Put a finger on the scale if you can.
And I think I should go against Oliver, just to make it more interesting here. Of course, impact needs a lot of time and a lot of development and so on, but you cannot be lazy, right? You need to find out something you need to do today and tomorrow. And I think that's the real skills and of research students and also researchers, where you can find the long-term impact, but still very exciting things to do today and tomorrow. And the soft robotics is actually a very good field where we have a lot of interesting new material, new functional materials we can explore today. But on the other hand, this ideas are nicely in line with the long-term challenges in embodied intelligence research. So I think that these are the kind of message we can think about. Don't be lazy, do something today, tomorrow, but then you still need to keep running for a long time.
I think perhaps also extending on that, soft robotics is a place where I often have undergrads. I haven't gotten any from you, Rifel. Send me more. They come into my lab and they can quickly produce exciting and fun demos, which is fantastic. And I love that because it excites them. But I do think if you want to make real impacts in soft robotics and embodied intelligence and robotics in general, you need the fundamental sciences, right? You need to go in and learn and appreciate all the math and all the mechanics and the electronics and whatever, the field is that you want to apply to, but you need all the fundamental sciences. And then, the demos become more than just demos, and you're actually adding to the forefront of science. So, pick carefully. And no one touched on this, but I was trying to plant a seed about the interdisciplinary collaborations. I do think go to lots of talks, go to talks that are very outside of your field of comfort, but also appreciate that you can't immediately start branching out until you have, some solid core knowledge of your own. Is that fair? I don't want to leave with the concluding remark. I'd love to put it for someone else too. So can I hand it off to either Ethan or Buck?
Yeah, no, I'll just echo that 100%. It's all about interdisciplinarity. And I'll talk about undergraduates in a different thread.
Fair enough.
On that note, something that's very related to disciplinarity for medical robotics, I would say is, it's important to identify a certain problem you're trying to solve and then be open to the whole world of solutions to that problem, and don't be too invested in your specific technology at the beginning. If you can solve a problem with only existing technology, then you should solve it that way. That's for sure how our NIH that funds medical research, that's how they think. And then you have to somehow balance that philosophy with your own desire to pursue interesting new technologies that may one day be part of that toolbox that you use, if you have reason to believe it will become something. The thing I've tried to do with myself is try and disconnect those two paths, though. I'm not trying to always force things to meet in the middle. So I'm working on bottom-up sort of new things, and I'm working on top-down application-driven things. And whether those two things meet in the middle is not important to me anymore. And that can be also a relief in a way.
Can I add, I just read Aaron Nolan's comment in the chat. If a problem is obvious and nobody else has solved it yet, then surely this suggests that the solution must lie somewhere far away from just looking at the problem itself, ? Therefore, exploring the things far away from the obvious problem might be more conducive to finding solutions in the long term. I actually think that many times the opposite is true. I think that we come with too much baggage of things that we learned during our studies, and we get too biased in using these tools and applying them to any, the thing, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I think really that we've forgotten that simplicity is not something that's there for its own sake, but the goal of science is simplicity, right? And I can very poorly quote, I don't even know, I think it's, I forgot who it was, who said that the goal of a science is to find simplicity in the things that seem so complex at first, right? And so to me, the most rewarding moments are when people look at a paper that I've written and say, well, this is so simple, I could have done that. This is the best, right? Because they didn't do it. And hundreds of people didn't do it. There was an obvious, simple solution lying in front of everybody the whole time. And it just needed to be picked up. But picking it up, that is really, big, important science, I think. So don't be afraid to try simple things first, right? It sometimes leads to very surprising results.
I think that is a perfect note to end today on. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Sorry.
Very much appreciated. No, that was great. So Professor Hughes, remind me what happens next. Is there breakout sessions?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Kirsten, for doing such an excellent job hosting as well. It's really not easy, and you've done a fantastic job keeping these discussions going and having these really interesting debates. So thank you so much for your contribution there. Yes, so the next thing is the breakout rooms. So I believe, Nargis, I believe we can share the schedule for that. And then hopefully magic will happen. And this time people will be able to move to the different breakout rooms. So we've got 2 sessions, I think, one on soft robotics and control, which is, as Oliver says, he is kicking off that room. And the second one is on robotics and learning. So yeah, we will just share.
Thank you all so much.
But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And then
Thank
we
you.
start again tomorrow at 9 a.m. GMT for another full packed action day of talks. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.